What's up, humans? Welcome to another episode of Shots from the Winchester Podcast, brought to you by Greencastle Consulting, your nation's premier strategy execution firm. I'm your host, Al Green, and we have an episode today with Del Roll, and we're going to have a talk with Steve Stratton, the author of Shadow Tier and Shadow Sanction. And I'm really looking forward to this because I've just recently started reevaluating who I am as a writer. And so I'm a big process guy. So I'm definitely looking forward to hearing what you're all about. Del, I saw you had the book up.
Yeah.
Let's see. What's
Shadow Tier by Steve Stratton. So my understanding, this is your first book, right? It's the first book. And then there's the follow-on, which is, Shadow Sanction. Perfect. Yes. And you have a much nicer cover than I do. But no, this is...
There's a story behind that, Del. Yeah, there's a story.
So I think Steve's he's got a pretty cool background. And one of the things that I particularly love, whether it's, military fiction, military/espionage, or espionage, is when you have a former practitioner who's writing it. It's not always 100% the way it is because, those of us who have done this stuff before, we want to make it authentic, but we also don't want to, let loose things that could, put our brothers and sisters in harm's way needlessly. But we do want to bring some authenticity to it. And I think Steve does that in spades. Steve's got a really cool background. And hopefully I'm going to get to know Steve a little bit more. In the coming summer, we've got a bunch of writers conferences coming up. You're going to Thriller Fest, right?
Yep, definitely.
All right, my man. We'll definitely link up there. But Steve's got a really cool background. Started out in the military. Started out in the White House Communications Agency, moved on to Special Operations in SF, and you also did some time in the U.S. Secret Service, correct?
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, it's a lot more fun if you talk about your background than if I do, because it just sounds creepy if I'm the one doing it. So, Steve, tell us about your journey that, from you being a little guy to where you are now. Have at it.
All right. By the way, I'm turning 70 this year, so this might be a long podcast.
You don't look a day over 30.
Thank you. I tell everybody I just got a new paint job, but some of the parts need replacement. So, I grew up in Northern California, up in the Redwoods, and when I saw Last of the Mohicans, I'm like, man, I used to run like that. Used to, being the key word. Through the woods and stuff. And so hunting, fishing, Northern California, just had a great time, until it got a little tough to be in the woods with pot growers and stuff and, machine guns and booby traps and things like that.
As one does.
As one does. Yeah, exactly. But after high school, I was like, I really don't want to go to college right away. I had spent my early part of my life, my aunt and uncle had subscription to National Geographic. And so, I had to take California history, but I was way more interested in what's going on in Africa, the Middle East, China, right? I wanted to see the world. So I went to the recruiters, and my whole family is Navy and Merchant Marine. But when I get into the deep ocean, let's say I turn green, and not Green Beret green, but green, So I ended up talking to the Air Force. So I was a little mercenary, so I went in the Army. It's the end of Vietnam. There's a chance to get promoted quickly if you're, smart technically. So I was going to go to the Ranger Regiment up at Fort Lewis, and my dad was born outside the base, relatives all over the place. And these guys showed up. They took all us, recruits, buzz cut soldiers into the theater, and these guys showed up in suits and longer hair and started talking about seeing the world. And they didn't say where they were, the unit's name. They said, you'd be working out of DC. And I just kept raising my hand. And next thing you know, they're changing my orders from being like a Ranger Regiment radio operator to a radio repair person. And so my track took me from Monterey basic training to Oklahoma for, a month or two, and then Fort Gordon, Georgia to the signal school. So I ended up getting to DC, finding out eventually when I got my clearance and stuff that it's the White House Communications Agency. Still didn't know what they did really, but I got to DC and my sponsor grabbed me, and we're going in and we're going by this building. He says, "You know what that is?" And I said, "Is that the Watergate?" He's like, "Yeah, don't go there." It was like a week before Nixon got on the helicopter and gave us the wave.
Oh wow.
So yeah. So don't go to the Hojos where they plan the break-in. Don't go to the Watergate. It's like, oh, I can make sure I don't do that.
Wow.
Right away, I'm 19. My first trip out of the United States in support of the vice president at the time, Rockefeller, because Ford had taken over, right? First trip out of the United States, we stopped for a couple days in Paris. We go to New Delhi for a couple days, and then I spend like 10 days in Dhaka, Bangladesh, waiting for the VP to show up.
Mhm.
And so what an eye opener, right? 19, across the United States, DC, and then across the world. And that just continued. So what White House Comm does really is support the president. Back in my time, before computers, when we still had rock tablets and, smoke signals, we did radios. And so like the unit I worked in, if you guys know where Georgetown is, that part of DC, literally that was where I was stationed, in Georgetown, in a building that had been there since the Cold War, had all these lower floors where they had teletypes and stuff.
Wow.
And so I thought, man, I'm in civilian clothes, my hair's longer. I think I like the Army, right? And I'm traveling. I'm traveling. I'm traveling on civilian airplanes. I don't have to be on C-130s and different things. And so we would go out in advance, just like we would go with the Secret Service, but we would go in advance and plan out the commo plan. Where do we need radios? Is he flying into this airport? What's the motorcade route? So we're hooking up radio systems and helping the Secret Service with their command post. And I worked in the division where we worked on the Motorola walkie-talkies, so the guys talking to their wrist, with the earpiece. And I had a great time. And so 4.5 years later, I've been working with the Secret Service all this time. So I thought, I still hadn't gone to college yet. So I thought, well, let's go check out Technical Security Division. They had electronic countermeasures. They had alarms and video. The EOD side, WMD. It wasn't called that back then, but chemical, biological stuff. And so I ended up getting hired into the alarms and video. So literally my job was to make sure that the sensors around the White House, the VP residence, during the campaign years, I put in alarm systems at Senator Kennedy's house. Eventually, at the end of my career, I was putting them in for Bush 1 at his house in Houston after he became, the presumptive vice president, with Reagan, things like that. So it was a blast. And I will say that working a campaign year, though, when in the Secret Service, was one of the hardest years I ever had. I was gone 300 days in that year, right? They couldn't pay me any more overtime because I'd used up all the scheduled and unscheduled overtime I was allotted for my pay. So it's sort of like, I should have had a sign that said working for food. And yeah, but it was a great time. I learned a whole lot. I got to go to some very special schools around improvised explosives and other things like that. We used to have a fun time down at Quantico doing demonstrations of why, if you get an envelope and it's greasy, just leave it lay where it's at, right? Because it's, can punch holes through your metal desk. So it was a great time, but it was also, I was pretty burned out after 4.5 with WACA and then another 2 with the Secret Service. I went to go on vacation to Florida and sent a fax back saying, thank you, I'm moving on, right? And from there, my career took me to a DOE facility that was in the middle of, between St. Petersburg and Clearwater. And as luck would have it, they were computerizing the alarm system. So from just magnets and current running through the lines, old style, they were actually computerizing it. And so they sent me to computer school. So I say all the time that volunteering always worked for me. and that I've been lucky in being in the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
At DOE, they actually wanted to hire a guy before me. I was like second on the list, but he was in the facility when an alarm went off. They threw out the barricades, brought up their HK, MP9s and stuff, and that guy didn't like it. And I'm like, guns, I like guns. Hey, I'm an Army. And so that's how I got in that job and started to get into the computer side of the world. So it's a long, strange course. And as I did that, and left the Secret Service, then I went into the National Guard and went through the process to get my Green Beret through 20th Special Forces National Guard, which is the East Coast National Guard unit, all the way from New Hampshire, Maryland, down to Florida and such. So
nice.
It's and so really lucky with that. And you see, actually, Dell understands this, that there's a whole lot of what I did when I was in the Guard in the books, especially in relationship to drug cartels and Colombia, Ecuador, other places like that, right? So, I do write fiction. I do have the issue. My first book, actually, I sent it through the DOD, DOPSR, they call it the review process. And actually, they sent it over because somebody else with a very similar name or my name was also working at the agency. They sent it over. And I get a call from this guy. And he's like, "Did you ever work?" And I'm like, "I can't tell you that. I can't tell you if I did or not. Work at the agency. I don't know who you are." And he's like, "Oh, never mind. Okay." And it took about 9 months for my book to get approved for publication. And there were only like 5 things. It's like, don't say this, don't say that. I'm like, it's in the general public. And they're like, we don't say this, we don't say that. And I'm like, okay, no problem. And then, I got lucky and found a publisher. So it was a strange course of events to get where I am today. But I wouldn't change it. Yeah, there's a couple things I would change, but not much, right? Not much in the way of the whole process.
You bring up an interesting point that whenever it comes up on the podcast, I like to highlight for folks, and that is frequently those of us who have done this before, for real, have to go through a review process. And I personally have to go through one that's different from the one that you go through. It can be nightmarish. I mean, it took you 9 months to get your manuscript cleared. I've heard horror stories of it going well over a year. It just depends on which one you go to, because, and it's not always because they're trying to be jerks about it, although DOD does consider call signs and frequencies from Vietnam to be still classified. I don't know. But in all fairness, it's also, this is an additional duty for someone. They have their day job and all their normal assignments, and you've got to read this manuscript and clear it word for word. So it does take a while. But what? And you bring up a good point about, I could definitely see your experience in 20th Group back in the 90s, the late 80s into 2000s up until up until 2000, the 90s, clearly resonates in this. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Sicario, just a touch. Before Sicario, was even a thing. But it's very cool, because I think, a lot of military espionage thrillers that have come out over the last 20 years have been, obviously focused on the long war and the counterterrorism mission. And, we were waist deep in this nightmare, long before the towers were attacked. So what inspired you to start writing, man?
2019 November, sort of, I was still working, and so for the viewers that are maybe not that tied in with the government, between Thanksgiving and January 3rd, it gets pretty quiet around the government, right?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
my wife's like, at that point, I had done PowerPoint, I had done Gantt charts, I had done storyboards, but I hadn't written the story. And my wife was like, why don't you just write? You're bored. I could tell you don't have enough to do, and work was still going on, but it was slowing down for the holidays. And so I started writing in November of 2019. And then just after the first of the year, I found Jerry Jenkins, who wrote the Left Behind series, the Christian Left Behind series, right? He lives down in the Black Forest between me and Colorado Springs. I'm a suburb of Denver, and I got this mentorship with him, and then it just started cranking. And I get up at 4:30, have coffee, say hi to people on the East Coast, and just get after it, start writing until about 9 o'clock East Coast time, 8:30, whatever, and then go back to work. I'm a morning person. I try not to, unless I've had too much caffeine. I'm not doing too much writing at night because it's too much editing after I get done. It's a mess. But that's what inspired me. The original incident that inspired the book happened in October of '93. And it was a personal event where my parents were coming back from Puerto Penasco at the top of Baja, coming back towards Tucson, when my dad was pulling fifth wheel trailer when some stoned drug runners hit the side of the truck, and my mom died in Mexico in a hospital.
Oh man.
And so, yeah. And so the whole idea about invading Mexico and getting revenge was some real thoughts I had, to be honest. So that was the genesis. It just took that long to come up and get the inspiration to write. I've always been a storyteller. I'd written proposals to the government, right? I'd written technical manuals, programs of instruction as a Green Beret, how we going to do the training. I'd done all kinds of writing except for novel writing. And Jerry Jenkins had to remind me that, look, Steve, we're writing a book. We're not writing a TV series where everybody's just talking over each other. And but that started me down the path, and I've been excited about it, having fun with it ever since. I love telling stories. I watch what comes out of IARPA and DARPA to get ideas about things. I see little things about events in the news, and it's like, wow, that'd be interesting. Me and my OSINT bend, I'm always hunting around for stuff. It's since that time, and it had a bit of a tragic impetus to it, but I got good relief from writing the book, getting it out, and then just continued on to the second book. And actually, the third book is in editing, and the fourth book is already written. So
nice.
I haven't stopped. In June 11th, I'll actually have an origin story for Lance come out, and it starts when his father dies of a heroin overdose on the Crow Indian Reservation when he's 14. And then it comes through time to just before the start of the book you've got there, Del, Shadow Tear.
That's pretty awesome, man.
Pretty... I definitely get you guys a copy, and love to get feedback. I'm one of those guys, writers. I love feedback. I don't care how harsh it comes, way it comes. I was told early on, like writing proposals for the government, have no ego, right? People are gonna first thing you do for the government, write a proposal is people called the red team come in and they scribble all over your document, throw this out, do this. So I'm used to getting feedback, and I appreciate anybody who takes the time out of their life to read my book or read my blog or get to my website and leave me feedback, because that's priceless, right? Because they've just spent how many hours it takes to read the book, their time that they're not going to get back. So I take that seriously,
For individuals who have not picked up your book before, right? Because we try to get a fairly broad audience. And why don't you tell us a little bit about just like the arc of the narrative? What is this series about for somebody who might say, hey, that sounds really awesome. Why don't I get myself a copy and dig in?
Oh, great. Thank you. Good question. So the first book is a revenge book, right? I don't have a terminal list like Jack Carr, but he knows who he wants to get after.
Yeah.
And so number one, I wanted to create a protagonist who was different and thought different, right? And so that's why I've got Lance Bearwolf is from a Crow native, from the reservation in Montana, who joined the Army and all that good stuff. So the incident happens, his parents are dead, he wants revenge, and he gets really sucked into the darkness. It's like, oh, the cartel does this, well, I can do one better kind of thing, and it gets so bad that he gets investigated, right? The Mexican government calls him a terrorist. And it's cartel influence, because he's really been doing some things, disrupting their business and stuff, especially on the West Coast, because his parents were killed in Los Moches, which is on the West Coast of Mexico, like on Highway 15, going back to Tucson. And so Lance, it's the struggle of wanting, the arc is really the struggle of wanting revenge, getting really dark, and then having to try and remember his place in the world. Ellie, who's a counterintelligence agent for SOCOM, is investigating him at first, and then becomes an ally, and even more in the second book. But the idea that there's this arc, and how do you keep from becoming the thing you hate the most, right? Right inside the front cover, right, is it's Marcus Aurelius saying, the greatest win is essentially don't become your enemies, right?
Yeah.
And so that's really what the story is about, is to not end up like your enemies, but still get justice. And I will tell you that it's as much as I like to keep the story straightforward and tight, I'm also influenced by Frank Herbert, who wrote Dune, and Clancy, right, who wrote books that go for like 35 hours in Audible, right? So Rainbow Six or something, right? It's it's a door stop, you can put your car on it, change the tire. So
and use it as a sappy plate if you're short on ornament.
That's right. That's if you got a level 3, put Rainbow Six in front, you're good.
That brings me to a point. And I don't know if, as writers, I don't know if we talk about this as much, but how do you get through the middle? Like a lot of us, we have a story we're telling, and we know what it sounds like from the beginning, and we have a good idea maybe how it's going to end. But I think what we end up as writers is we get caught up trying to figure out how to fill in the middle, and like these from 2019 to now, you've got 3 books. So you've got a method.
Well, and it's funny you say this. So, right, as I transitioned out of, when I left Department of Energy, I went to work for SAIC, and so I learned how to be a PMP, right? I'd already done some management and stuff, and being just a Green Beret and having to train foreign troops. But then I'm learning, and that's hence the Gantt chart and other things like that. Critical path, critical path. So it's funny because at first I thought I'm a 100% a plotter, right? And I do. I'll write the chapters out and put 1 or 2 lines. In that first book, in a room behind me, in our front room, we have a long wall with 1,600 cookbooks that are my wife's. Wow. And I had stickies all over that those bookcases, and going down like this, it started to look like one of the movies where you've got the stickies and the yarn going this way and that way. I was doing it all trying to keep the first book in my head. And what I was scared of was that I was just going to get repetitive. It'd be like 3 chapters of action and a little slow down, and 3 chapters of action, because I sort of laid it out that way at the start. Because when I'll do my chapters, I'll put a W for Wolf, I'll put an E for Ellie, I'll put a whoever the bad guy is, right? I'll say chapter 3, but I'll have the bad guy's name there so I know how to focus the point of view. But yeah, I'm totally process driven. But what I've gotten to now is I do the outline, but then I allow myself to pants and move around. I've taken chapters out and said, no, this one's better down here for flow, so I give myself the freedom. I'm OCD, but I give myself the freedom to move and change it. And the middle, right? The middle is interesting. And I find, once again, I have to be careful that I just don't go into this deep, 16 chapters of the bad guy, the enemy gets a choice, gets a say two kind of setting. And so the first book took place in 98. So I had to make sure I had all the right gear, my editor kept going, hey, where's the P320 Legion? I'm like, it wasn't a thing. In fact, we didn't have SIG P320s in 98, So I trying to set that up. And then with the cartel, what I was able to do in the middle is, okay, we get by, now Lance wants revenge. How do I start to ratchet up? And then they start to adapt to each other and get after each other. And I think the first time I wrote that book, it was 120,000 words.
Wow.
And I'm throwing in a lot of stuff like, that I have in my knowledge base. Oh, it's like this or that. And I wasn't going real deep on weapons, trying to give you the ballistics for, an M60 machine gun and things like that. But there was a lot of stuff in there that was like interesting tidbits. It's like Steve's going to tell you a little tidbit, but I'm like, that's not pulling the story forward, right? I can start to cut pieces out.
Yeah, I've done that myself.
Right? What do they say? You got to be able to kill your darlings, right?
Yeah.
But that middle. So my book that's going to be the third one out, I struggled with the middle a little bit because it was like, wait a minute, we're in this setting, right? It's a non-permissive environment. So Lance and Ellie have gone in together, and they've identified the crops. But now what I had to do is sort of create influences from outside. So it wasn't just El Chapo and his, you'll get the hint here about where it takes place, but his Cuban intelligence officer, working against each other, but then had influences outside that were affecting the team, the Shadow Tier team, and their access to assets, overhead assets, different things like that. And they've got to MacGyver something together by using maybe a little inappropriate, but to use satellites that belong to different non-military organizations, that look for brush fires and other things like this. So that was they tell us to always, like, you need to put your good guy in situations. Well, the neat thing is when we're writing, it doesn't have to be a gunfight, right? Or you're at the edge of the cliff hanging on by two fingers. It can be external sources that are influencing your ability to execute, right? And people have been in the military and some of the other triple letter agencies have seen it. If you've been around long enough, you've been in a position where you can't get the resources you want. You'd like to have the top tier resources, and it's like, nope, sorry, they're all accounted for, and you've got to figure it out. And so that's the kind of, it's my MacGyver mindset. I have to figure out other ways to get through the middle, but still have it be part of that story and that influence. And right. So once again, it's like, oh wow, I need to do this in this chapter and that. And
just to pull people through.
Process is important, right?
Yeah, it's important in a lot of ways to with writing. It's like it's like the valley of death to some extent for some people, because you have such a clarity of what you want of this character, what the story is about. You may even have a theme or a message behind it, but not a way to like string it all together. And I think what's important too about getting through that middle is making sure that you've got challenges against the characters, something that's driving the story narrative from chapter to chapter, that's giving the reader or the listener or whatever some kind of like thread that needs conclusion, that needs to have some kind of solution, and just keep it flowing, and that's when I'm writing, that's where I'm getting kind of like, I feel like I need something more, and I might be overthinking it,
Yeah. Well, it's funny because one of my favorite authors, Brad Taylor, says he starts off sometimes with a sentence and idea, but I realize now, plus I've gone from it's jolting to really liking Pike Logan in first person, for example. But then he adds in location, right? He and his wife go on a vacation because he's got an idea, and they go visit places that they put in the book, and that sort of, so location and Taylor Moore, right, is really good with location, right, and his stories about the Panhandle and stuff like that. So I've started to incorporate those kind of things, more internal dialogue with my protagonist and different people, so that we get to know them better and see their traits. But it also, to be honest, it takes up some of that space and some of that pressure about figuring out what to do next. Because I was sort of, in the first book, it's like, yeah, it's a run and gun battle journal, it's like, yeah, after it. And then I had to go back and say, wait a minute, I need to put some heart into this story, right? We need to see Lance grow, right? And hopefully come out of this, Darth Vader like depression where he just wants to slaughter everything and everybody. In the second book, in the first edition of the second book, Lance, there's a part of the book where they ended up under a waterfall, semi Last of the Mohican style, and then some dogs come in, and first iterations of that book, it's like Lance dispatches the dogs, and everybody's like, no, you can't kill dogs. You can't do that. Don't kill the cat, don't kill the dog.
Yeah.
And I'm a dog lover, man. I'm a German Shepherd lover. My wife likes Dobermans, but they're like getting on me. So I had to rewrite that, right, and think of other ways to keep the tension up, and still make it believable that they could get away and stuff like that. So if I have the structure, then I think that gives me personally the space. I don't think I could ever just pants, because it would be nonsensical. I'd write some weird story and I'd end up with Lance and, Master Chief from Halo meeting or something crazy. Yeah. But so having that structure then allows me to have that freedom to move around.
So question for you. And I love the fact that you get that nuance and that detail in terms of the environmentals. And I think we really do need to use Brad Taylor as kind of like a guidepost on that. So, but you've got to set your scene somewhere other than the Sinaloa, the Badlands of Mexico. That's not a place you want to vacation. But hey, I do have a specific question, and it kind of just dawned on me. What inspired you to make your protagonist an Indigenous person? Because I think that's really cool, because we want our protagonist to be something different, something that the world hasn't seen before. And reality is, and I'd love to see more people reading this, is your military espionage thriller is going to live in a larger ecosphere that's going to include all kinds of different genres and subgenres. But what inspired you to make him an Indigenous person?
Well, I've studied Indigenous people, and then through martial arts and things, got other more Eastern mindsets and teachings and understandings and things like that. And same kind of idea. I wasn't a Navy SEAL, my family's all Navy and Merchant Marine, but I went in the Army, because I like the dirt more than the ocean. And but I was looking for just that, looking for somebody with a different perspective, somebody who would have a spiritual side, not necessarily tied to religion, but, you know, without getting all Mother Earth and pilgrim dress and, you know, hippie, just more tied in that way, and then looking at the world a bit differently. Not that he hasn't been influenced by, you know, becoming a ranger and then joining, you know, going through special forces selection, things like that. But right, even when he's in early parts of his military career, Lance is like going to infantry school, and his whole life he's been taught how to sneak up and hide and, you know, watch animals or hunt and things like that. And in infantry school, it's like we march out and we punch them in the face, you know, and it's like
Yeah.
jolting and exciting to him. Yeah. Not much stealth, right?
Yeah.
Movement to contact. So, yeah, that I thought about it long and hard. I've actually written another series with a female protagonist who's deaf and wears a cochlear implant. Turns out the company Cochlear is just over in Lone Pine off of 25 south of Denver. But I have a tendency to go towards different, wanting to give different points of view. And right, there's still the elements of military espionage, you know, the ints, right, SIGINT and human, all those kind of things. But Lance sees those a bit different, and I like writing from that perspective. I like in my own way to honor the Native Americans and the way that what they brought, and how they treated the land, and having grown up in the redwoods and having that reverence for being out in the woods and the animals, and even when I was hunting and things like that till this day. So it took me a little while, and then it dawned on me that, you know, you don't see this out here, right? Glad you noticed.
No, absolutely. It's
Yeah,
very,
well,
it's very cool. Hey, question. So you're a Mac guy, you said?
Well, I've got yeah, I'm all of them. I've got my what do you call it? Tablet Windows thing here, but yeah, I'm on a Mac.
Okay.
I've had Mac since the very first little square one looked like R2D2.
Okay. So are you a Scrivener guy?
No.
Scrivener. Nice.
Yeah, I'm once again, proposals, blah, blah, blah. I'm a Word guy, right? Before that, I was Word Perfect. Before that, I was Word Star. That's how old I am.
I used to use
college.
Yeah.
I mean, I brought it up because just out of pure curiosity, because you had mentioned Macs before. I've tried Scrivener. I've really tried, but I just, it just doesn't resonate with me. It's like everybody says, well, it's so intuitive. And I'm like, yeah, supposedly Mac products are intuitive, but they're not to me. But yeah, I'm with you, brother, because I remember I used Lotus for years, but that's, a long time ago.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I'm on a Mac, and so one of part of my journey as a writer has also been that my publisher decided to get out of business. So the person I published the first two books with decided to leave the business. Very nice. Gave me all the rights to the books. That's why you see a different kind of cover on the second book than the. There's a second edition for Shadow Tier and Shadow Sanction, and that I put online. So at the end of the year, he gave me the letter. He gave me all the rights, and then I went through the whole learn about Amazon, Author Central, all that kind of stuff. And what I need to do is finish it up and learn about Ingram Spark so I can have that, because they've got such great distribution, whether it's Barnes and Noble, Walmart, Target, all the other online, not in their store, but so I got to learn that part of, so that the books now, if you were to buy one, are self-published. They're also, if you have Kindle Unlimited, you can get them for free, because I put up the ebooks in Kindle Unlimited. But that's been part of what I've been doing. And in that process, I bought Vellum, which runs on a Mac and then allows me to put the Word document into all these formats, all the different EPUB, Nook, Fire, blah, 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 Amazon, paperback. It even does hardback. What it doesn't do is the covers. And I was so lucky to find a new cover artist, sort of a friend, and that's worked out amazingly. So right now the books are available in Kindle Unlimited, and then paperback. And once I get back over to IGS Ingram Spark, I'll be able to put up a hardback again if customers are interested in it. But part of the journey, learning all this new software, how to do the keywords, like you say, inside, so people can even find your book. Very interesting.
Steve, that's a very interesting point, because we've done a couple of interviews with authors as of late, talking about how writing can be therapeutic. It can help you transition and deal with some of the things you may have experienced in the military. And you bring up a point that I think a lot of people just don't understand, because they don't understand the business component of how do you actually take ideas that are up in here and make them into a book. And it's more than just you sit down and you write a book and you send it to a publisher. You've got the traditional route where you've got to get yourself a agent to represent you, and then go to one of the big publishers if that's what you want to do. You can go to a smaller publishing organization that maybe you don't need an agent. And then there's the route of self-publishing, which is totally different, because it's you. It's basically you. There's no marketing team, there's no pub team, and there's like 57 different flavors of this whole process. And you brought up an excellent point about how you may have a manuscript and you're in the self-publishing, but you know what? It's got to be in different formats depending on how it's going to be delivered, whether it's hardback, softback, digital, if it's going to Kindle, if it's going to Nook, yada, yada, yada. So maybe you could share with us, and our listeners, if you were going to talk to yourself 20 years ago, who's about to just start on this journey of being a writer, what would you tell them? What would you tell a younger Steve?
Right. Well, hopefully I could tell younger Steve. I was very lucky, being a veteran. I learned about the veteran writing community and connected right away with Jeff Wilson of Wilson and Andrews. They're both great guys, excellent writers, of course, but really nice about helping you understand what's going on as an entry writer, veteran into the writing space. And it's interesting because it was foretelling of where they're at now. But they were looking at the idea of, okay, we're traditionally published. We want to be doing some self-publishing stuff, and then also be in the mid-tier, so we can control and try different ideas. Right? They've got the Christians, the Shepherd series. They've got Sons of Valor. Now they got is it 4
Dempsey?
Minutes?
Oh yeah, 4 seconds.
Dempsey
Yeah.
was dark and crushing. It was awesome.
I mean, they've got all kinds of ideas. It's amazing.
Right. And plus they got a bunch of things now working. And so their idea was to be in these different channels. Because unless, if you're a Brad Thor and they print 2 million books on a run once a year, and you're set, or even a Brad Taylor, they were looking at how right, because there's 2 of them on a team. How do we maximize our ability to output quality product quickly and then get it in these different channels for different people? So there's several people who have started off self-publishing. You're keeping all the profit after the print cost, right? There's really, you're doing a little sharing with Amazon on certain and on the ebook pubs aside. But there's several people that have started off that way, where big houses have come into them and said, hey, we'd like to talk to you about writing something, right? Because they've gotten a nice audience and set themselves aside. I got lucky finding that small publisher. I got an advance on a 1 book plus 2 options.
Wow.
Right? Yeah, my first time out, and I got a nice advance. And then, unfortunately, they went out of business. But I thought, you know what? Number one, I want to get these books back out there, so I'm going to self-publish. So I was sort of driven. I I had a choice. I could have just let them go and kept writing other things, but I wanted to get them out because I have in mind for Shadow Tier a 5-book series plus the novella origin story. And right. And so now I'll do that online, and I'm actually looking and traditionally querying this other series with the deaf. She works at the agency. She's a deaf psychiatrist at the agency, so or psychologist. Sorry, I get it mixed up. And so I'm in both spaces while David Temple is doing the audiobook version of book 2. And I just heard a sample today. It's amazing to hear somebody with a radio voice like David's and radio.
Oh, that's very cool.
Yeah, really read your own book. It's amazing. I'm not sure how these new AI generating systems do, but so I got a few things going on, and it's just fun. Number one, it keeps me out of getting out of too much trouble, or breaking another ankle, dirt bike racing or something like that. I'm going out to start motorcycles up before it snows tomorrow, later today. But anyway, it is you have options, and you could publish, you could do some novellas or short stories, get yourself known. There's so many ways to start to grow an audience. I was very lucky that, from my professional life, I had a big following on LinkedIn, and just a lot of people. But what I've done, and it's not everybody doesn't have the money to do all this, but so I know some parts of social media, but I hired it out because I got some people that really get it. And then there are other parts, like occasionally I bought ads and different things like that, but usually through them because they're smarter at it than me. So I'm and editing, right? I think I write great stories, but I probably have a pocket full of commas that should be in something I wrote this morning. I need editors, and not just one editor. I need multiple editors. And I think I'm getting better, but even the software like AutoCrit and Pro Writing Aid doesn't fix it all for you. So you can get into this in many different ways, young Steve. And you just decide on if you really want to go for that traditional publishing, write the best story you can and start the query process. I still, I bought it in 2020. I bought Query Manager to help me because I figured if I had to do it in spreadsheets and things, I'd mess it up, right? So $25 a month for Query Manager. Publishers Direct or Publishers Weekly, another $25 a month, and it tells me who's buying what and who's getting what deal and stuff like that. So, and as you guys know, practitioners know, we could bring this all back to, right? You got to know what you want to do. You create a strategy. You have some objectives. You break it down into tasks, and you start to get after it. And I'm still learning. I'm never going to stop learning, but it's like, okay, I bought 3 or 4 things to help me query, understand the market, made sure I got on X and was communicating with the likes of Gina Panetteria and different people, right? Tried to create a tribe, a new community. And then, oh, wait a minute, now I got to self-publish. I got to buy a couple more things, do some more investigation, And so you said process, right? I had a strategy. I wanted to go traditional, but then when it wasn't exactly working, just before it did work, I was thinking about, okay, let's self-publish Shadow Tier. And then the deal showed up. And so it was when I got the deal, signed the paperwork, he was very honest and said, I'm behind. It'll be about a year before I can publish your book. And I was like, okay, I'll just keep writing. Well, I've had to go back to those writings because they were writings from back then when I knew less about writing than I know today. That's book 3 and 4. And so I'd already started those. And with this other series, I have 1 book done and 2 books that are like different ideas at 40K. And so, I can determine, say I'm querying that book series. I always tell people, and it's not only about writing, it's like start with a strategy. Where do you want to go? break it down like we talked about, and don't be afraid to change course. If you start going down this road and your idea is just not clicking, but you've got beta readers and you've got people who are interested and you've started a blog or mini podcast, whatever, you're starting to put it out for them. Put it out for those people, right? Put it out for $2 in e-form or whatever, and start to grow your mail list, start to grow your people.
Mm-hmm.
And if that doesn't work, don't be afraid to change course, right? Give yourself the freedom to do that, because that's the ability to, we can constrain ourselves and get stuff ourselves into a corner and get mad about it. Or I can say, nah, this isn't working so good. Let me try this. Right. Yeah. And what do good entrepreneurs do? They're not afraid of fast failing, right? It's like, let's try this idea. What's it look like? What's it cost to bring it to market? That's not working real good. Let's go over here and do something else. And you could be that way as a writer. If you're writing nonfiction and you're the next Ambrose or, that kind of thing, good on you. But, I'm having fun doing these different things. I'm having fun self-publishing and querying. And so.
Yeah. Like we said, the process is something that a lot of people get caught up with. And we always want to make sure that we're not alone in it. Like other people are doing things that are they may think is bizarre, like the way I walk to think, and or I wash the dishes and I stop washing the dishes because I have another idea, so I'm back over at the computer again and I'm back at the dishes and back and forth because I have to have my devices or whatever available, because at any moment that idea is going to drop and I need to make sure I write it down, not to lose it.
Indeed.
Yeah, exactly.
So Steve, question number one, what are you reading right now?
What am I reading? Actually, I'm listening to while I'm editing. And the third book, when I'm not editing, I'm listening to Chaos Agent by Mark Greaney.
Nice.
Yeah. Of course, love the Gray Man series. I think he and Mark Greaney, Brad Taylor are my two favorite authors. Love Don Bentley. I get Bentley in there when I can. Of course, Wilson and Andrews when they pop up, like with Dempsey, things like that. So, and then I actually just read Mongol Moon by Mark Sibley and listened to it. And Terry Schappert, right, from Hollywood Weapons, the former Green Beret, he actually did the voiceover, which is really good.
Oh, very cool.
It's a very interesting story, right? And the news today is talking about China, Russia, and Iran doing war games together. Guess what Mark's book's about? It's like, it's coming home. But and it's funny because I was taught early on by Jerry Jenkins that good writers are good readers, great writers are great readers. And I've taken Bentley's book, I've taken one of Brad Taylor's book. I bought the paperback and tore it all up and put it on the walls, trying to learn the craft, right? How's the flow working? All the things they teach us, And so, I've got a couple shredded books that I sort of stuffed back in a cover in my case and stuff like that. So.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. All right. Well, the last question is, and any one of our writer guests who touch upon the espionage space, I just have to ask this question. Who's your favorite Bond? Now, I'm not telling you that there's a right answer. There's certain answers that are more right than others. But I defer to you because you're the guest.
Let's see. I'm not sure what was at the end of that rotation. But I remember going to the drive-in in the back of the station wagon and seeing the original James Bond.
Oh, wow.
And, yeah. So, and I had an auto shop teacher who had a DB2, and we got to work on his car in school, his James Bond car in school. And,
that's cool.
Oh yeah, man, it was crazy. But I think the original James Bond is my favorite. I remember being in Valbonne and then going down in the Monte Carlo, and
Mm-hmm.
being sort of let down when I got into casino.
Yeah.
You know, I had a really nice deal on the company dime, but yeah, the casino's a little smaller than, of course, the movies make it out to be and stuff. But
Yeah.
I'd say Q and the original Bond are two of my favorite. Not that I don't like Daniel Craig and a couple of the others, but yeah.
Awesome.
Nostalgia there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, Steve, thank you so much for joining us. It's always great to have somebody new, somebody that maybe we want to hear more about on the podcast, especially somebody who's a veteran and a writer. And like I was saying before, you know, there is nothing better than getting a former practitioner who's actually done the things that they write about. Not that you have ever gone on the one-man warpath into Mexico and made yourself into a terrorist, but you could have. But you could.
I gave it some serious thought. Like,
Yeah.
So
well, thank you so much, guys. Thank you for having me. It's been a lot of fun. I look forward to seeing you at Thriller Fest and catching up on reading. And anytime anybody, you know, either of you guys or anybody of your listeners that's interested in reaching out or want to ask a question, I'm always open to it. I'm retired now, so I've got plenty of time.
Awesome.
Good stuff.
Well, thanks, mate. Much appreciated.
Make sure you guys like and subscribe. And on behalf of Greencastle Consulting, your nation's premier strategy execution firm, I'm your host, Al Green. Del Roll. Steve, we're going to have a great week and hope you do too. See you in the next video.
See ya.